Hello. Hi, good evening. Welcome to Stowe Talks again. Now, tonight's session is about understanding the early warning signs of abusive relationships. Now, it's a very serious topic, clearly. We've covered domestic abuse several times in various different formats on Stowe Talks. And unfortunately, the sad reality is that we will continue to cover domestic abuse in all its forms forevermore, unfortunately, I think, on this sort of forum. Abusive relationships rarely start out as abusive, or obviously abusive, I should say. Behaviour frequently starts subtly and it builds over time. Now, victims are left feeling obviously isolated. They're frequently removed from friends and family. They'll be trapped. They're confused. We know about that. We talk about it frequently. Tonight, what we're talking about is the importance of knowing how to spot the early warning signs. Tonight, we're going to be talking about the tactics of abusers, the early warning signs of coercive control, red flags, as we frequently call them, repeating cycles of abuse, and then a happy note to end on: healthy relationships and how to find one. But as you know, if you've joined us before, normally our listeners are interested in the topic for a specific reason. You might be somebody going through a family breakdown. You might have had a relationship end. You might be supporting somebody who's going through a relationship breakdown. And if you're listening to tonight's session, it may well be that you're supporting someone who is in an abusive relationship. You might be in an abusive relationship yourself. You might even be a law student learning more about the subject, or even a fellow practitioner. Whatever capacity you're here in, obviously we welcome you. And I'm really pleased about this evening's session. Tonight's guest is Karen Kipping, and I have a huge affection for Karen. Now, Karen is an experienced divorce and separation coach. She's got over 15 years experience working in the domestic abuse sector. Now, I'm sure she'll set me right if I've got that slightly wrong. She's been through domestic abuse herself, and she had a very difficult divorce, and she's now helping others and has been doing so for quite a few years now. Having been through that, her expertise is second to none, frankly. We talk frequently over the times that we meet about abuse, how things are different, how the law is changing on occasion, how abuse is manifesting in different ways. I'm a big fan of Karen anyway, because she's written a book that I do recommend to clients called Recognition to Recovery. If you are interested in the subject, I really recommend you get a copy. That's not a shameless plug for the book. I genuinely think it is one of the best books out there. When a book like that is written by a survivor of coercive control, and someone who also works as an independent domestic violence advocate, I think the insight is a really good one, and it's really clearly written. So, as I say, tonight is again a serious topic, but we're hoping that it's going to be a practical and an empowering session. Our goal is to help everyone always feel more in control, and it's a very difficult situation if you are in an abusive relationship, or you suspect you are, or if someone close to you, you suspect that they're in an abusive relationship. So we've got obviously the chat function as usual here in tonight's session. Please be respectful to each other on the chat. I know you always are, but obviously feel free to leave comments, questions as always. Karen and I will always answer your questions. Please put them in the Q&A function at the top, and we'll try and obviously make sure we cover everybody and get through all the questions. Feel free to ask anything. Nothing is off limits. Just bob the questions in and we'll try to get through them. Another housekeeping point that I need to remember to tell everybody is obviously we're recording tonight's session. Now, despite the slightly inadvertent colouring of the slides that you're going to be seeing tonight, this is a gender neutral space. We are talking about domestic abuse without reference to a specific gender. We do know, obviously, that it's much harder for men to come forwards as victims of domestic abuse. We've got the stats. We know that they are changing year on year as more people are feeling able to come forward. But we don't still have the true picture as to how many victims of domestic abuse are men, though we know it has been a topic that has been sidelined in the past for a variety of reasons. Okay, where am I? Let me get back to my housekeeping. Yeah, questions, please use the Q&A function. Chat space, obviously, is a safe space for people to ask, to make comments as well. Let us have feedback. Our webinars are driven by you guys. If there is a topic that we've covered in the past that you've missed, or you'd like us to take a deeper dive into something, then of course let us know. I'll have any excuse to have Karen back on our webinar, because I think she's awesome. If only she had a bit more time. I'd be having her in all my sessions. Anyway, right, tonight the format is as we've had before, so we're going to have Karen's presentation and then questions. So without further ado, Karen, if you're there, can you see me?
I can.
Fire away.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Sarah. I've got quite a big head now with all of your positivity. Bless you. Yeah, so really happy to be talking about this subject because, like you say, lots of people do question those warning signs. They do question, am I in an abusive relationship? Is it coercive? What is coercive? What does that mean? So we're going to really kind of unpick some of those questions that people might have and some of those thoughts that they might have. So I'm just trying to work out how to move this bar thing down here. Don't know. Okay, so what is domestic abuse? Lots of people still think of domestic abuse as physical. They think of it as, you know, being punched in the face or hit or bruised or, you know, that kind of physical harm. And actually, for many, many people, there is no physical abuse. And even if there is, that comes much later. I would say to people, you know, if you went on a first date and somebody punched you in the face, would you go back for a second date? No, you wouldn't. So that stuff comes much later on once you're actually tied into that relationship with that person. But just because your relationship is not physical, it does not necessarily mean that you are safe by any means. And we'll talk about the crux of these relationships and what they're based on shortly. So it can consist of things like financial abuse. So perhaps you don't have access to your own income or your own bank account, or you are not allowed to work or earn your own money. Maybe you have to justify all your spending. Maybe you have to provide receipts for even the basics of things with your partner. And again, that can be something that comes in later on in the relationship. But the emotional abuse is what starts right from the beginning. And emotional abuse can consist of things like criticizing you, belittling you, putting you down, calling you names, making you feel generally unloved, unworthy, making you feel bad about yourself. And a lot of people say that actually the emotional abuse is much harder to recover from later on, because with physical abuse, those injuries fade, the bruises fade and heal, whereas the emotional abuse is harder to forget because it's words. and you can't unhear what you've already heard. So that tends to be the stuff that really affects people. Sexual abuse, again, is another very common tactic. I was just talking about that this morning. That was the topic of my Insights program this morning, was sexual abuse. Very, very prevalent. Again, you know, you're there at your most vulnerable moments. When we talk about sexual abuse, we're not just talking about the sexual act, we're talking about intimacy, we're talking about love and affection. Aside from sexual abuse, we talk about this thing called coercive control. Now, what is coercive control? Coercive control are the subtle tactics of abuse. The things that make you feel dependent on somebody else. Coercive control is really about creating a culture of fear within the relationship, where there is a real power imbalance. So one person is very much in control and dictating how things should and shouldn't be within the relationship. And you can feel very pressured to behave in a certain way. And what happens is you start to adjust your behavior to please the other person, to keep things calm and to keep the kind of status quo and keep the relationship together. So what are the early warning signs of abuse? So with these kinds of relationships, they are very intense. They happen very quickly. They become serious very quickly. They can feel really quite intoxicating in a good way to start off with. They can be very passionate. You can think, yay, do you know what? I've really won the jackpot here. You know, I've got Prince Charming or Princess Charming. And you can feel really, you know, like a massive high, a big adrenaline rush with these kind of relationships. And that's intentional, because if you get that much of a high, then when the tactics, the subtle tactics start creeping into your relationship, you're less likely to notice them and you're more likely to dismiss them. Okay. So it's all about, you know, making you feel amazing in those early days. But what happens is over time, you will start to notice a little criticism here, a little criticism there, a little negative comment, bit of belittling, putting you down. And you might question it and think, well, why have they said that to me? You know, I'm not sure I really deserve that. But you just dismiss it and you brush it off and you think, oh, I'm making too much of it, and you carry on. And at the same time, what's happening is your abuser is isolating you. So they are stopping you from talking to other people because they want all of your attention, and they want to have as much power and control over you as they possibly can. And the quicker they can isolate you from friends and family, from work colleagues, from anybody else who is normally in your circle, the more power they have. So they are grooming you into the relationship. And that can feel like a really strong label, you know, to be groomed into a relationship. But that is what they are doing. They are manipulating you, and they are behaving in a way that is not honest and truthful. You know, they are giving you a fake persona, if you like. So they are duping you into a relationship with somebody who actually doesn't exist, because the way that they're behaving in the early days is fake. And then as they start to become braver, then they will start to bully you. So they'll start to punish you if you don't do things in a certain way. They might sulk, they might glare, they might give you the silent treatment. And at that point, you can start to feel quite threatened, quite intimidated. So they don't actually have to touch you or physically hurt you, but you can start to feel frightened of voicing your opinion or speaking up for yourself. So it presents as this really intense love bombing early on in that relationship. So they are throwing all the positivity at you. They are taking you to really nice places. They're buying you things, maybe spending lots of money on you, giving you loads of compliments, really showering you, using really intense words like, you know, we're soulmates. I've never felt like this before. And of course, you know, you may, you know, grab onto that with both hands, particularly if you've not had great relationships in the past, or you perhaps don't have a lot of confidence or a lot of life experience with relationships. You know, you want to feel amazing. You are hoping that somebody's going to make you feel like this. And what that does is it helps you drop your boundaries, and you want to please the other person. But at the same time, what they're doing also is creating a culture of fear. So you start to become afraid of voicing your opinion. You start to learn that it's not actually worth you having an opinion, because if you try to raise an issue with them, then you get punished for it. And over time, what happens is the power imbalance escalates, and it becomes more and more evident as to who is in charge and who is not. And it impacts on you in many different ways, physically, emotionally, socially. You know, it affects every area of your life, because these relationships are all consuming. You are constantly thinking about the other person's needs, you know, from the minute that you wake up in the morning to when you go to bed at night, and sometimes during the night if they're waking you up. You are constantly trying to keep them happy or trying to keep the situation calm. And this is where we get this phrase called walking on eggshells. So walking on eggshells means you are starting to feel anxious and nervous all the time. So you're worried about breaking the eggshells. You're worried about doing something wrong. You're worried about getting into trouble, worried about making them angry or stressed. Worried about how it's impacting on the children as well. Perhaps you might have children by that point. You're worried about how you're being perceived by other people, and it really makes you question your judgment about everything. You start to become withdrawn. You start to become more insular. You start to isolate yourself from other people because that's just easier. You start to not go out, perhaps. And it's a real emotional roller coaster, though, because they are not horrible all the time. Sometimes they, you know, throw a bit of niceness in there. They do treat you well. They apologize. They promise that it will never happen again. And so you're on this constant emotional roller coaster where you're thinking, well, why are they horrible to me one minute, but then they're nice the next? And it causes a lot of confusion. And so at different points in the relationship, you might feel like you'd love them still, but you just don't like their behavior. You just want that to stop. You're not sure whether you want to stay in the relationship. You're not sure whether you can leave or what leaving looks like. So there's a lot of things to consider. And if you are worried about somebody else who might be in an abusive relationship, signs that you might look out for can be difficult to spot, because people who are surviving coercive control and domestic abuse are very good at protecting the person that is abusing them. They are very good at lying for them, making excuses for them, covering up for them, taking on responsibility for what is actually not their fault at all. It's the other person's behavior. But you might notice that they do start to make excuses a lot of the time, excuses why they can't attend social events, excusing their partner's behavior, lying for them, covering up for them. So they end up colluding with them. And they collude with them because that's what they do to stay safe. You know, they know that they're being watched, they're being listened to. And if they don't behave in the right way, they're going to get punished for it afterwards. But you might notice a change in their normal behavior. So they might not be keen on giving you eye contact. They may look very nervous, agitated. You might spot some physical signs of them shaking. Maybe they, struggle to articulate. Maybe they try and shut down conversations because they don't want to talk about what's happening at home. You might see subtle signs that they're not coping. Maybe they're drinking a little bit more than they would usually. Maybe they're partying a bit too hard. Maybe they are overworking because they don't want to go home. Maybe they're really struggling with their mental health and they're struggling with depression, but actually the depression is a symptom of what is going on at home. So some of the signs can be very, very subtle. And of course, there can be lots of reasons why people feel depressed and why people don't want to go out. But it's about thinking what is normal for them and what has changed, and trying to put the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle together, really, and make sense of it all. So what is the cycle of abuse? The cycle of abuse is, I think of it as a bit like a hamster wheel. The only way it's going to change is if the hamster gets off. And unfortunately, you're the hamster, because this kind of behavior doesn't change. It doesn't get better. The wheel just keeps going round and round and round. So we start off with point 1, which is escalation. So this is where you are walking on eggshells. You're constantly adjusting your behavior. You're constantly trying to keep things calm and make everything okay. But of course, it's never going to be okay because you're not the problem, and your abuser's always going to have some excuse to criticize you or put you down. But they're becoming more frustrated, more agitated. Maybe their tactics aren't working as well as they used to. Maybe you are starting to stand up for yourself a little bit and they don't like it. So then there becomes a big explosion. And that can be verbal, it could be physical, it can be sexual, but there's usually some big explosion where you feel frightened. They have to exert that little bit more power and control to put you back in your place. But of course, afterwards, then they will panic. They will worry, oh my goodness, maybe I've pushed it too far and maybe they might actually leave me. Maybe they might report me to the police. So they might start to apologize, to make excuses. They might promise to go to marriage counselling. They might shift the blame and make you believe that it's your fault. And then what happens is you don't leave, they get away with it, and everything goes back to normal. And the situation calms down. Maybe they are behaving for a while. Maybe they are treating you nicely. Maybe you have a bit of hope that that was going to be the last time and everything is going to get better. But of course, it doesn't last because, again, it's fake and it's manipulation. So it doesn't last very long. And before you know it, you're back around on the hamster wheel and it all starts to build up again. So that's what we call the cycle of abuse. Hope that makes sense. So when you want to get off the hamster wheel and you want to break the cycle, how do you leave? It does take, on average, 8 times for people to leave an abusive relationship. Now, that can be different for different people. Sometimes it might just take the once. For other people, they will leave and go back because perhaps they weren't ready, they weren't feeling strong enough, they hadn't planned it properly. Maybe they were threatened and they felt too scared, so they went back. There are all sorts of reasons why people leave and then go back. And we should never judge anybody, when they do return back to that relationship. It's very difficult to leave an abusive relationship, but it is absolutely doable if you plan it right. And if you understand your rights and you build a support team of people around you and you safety plan, okay? In most circumstances, we would really urge you to plan and not to leave in the spur of the moment or after an incident, if you can help it. Because if you can plan, it's going to be a calmer approach. You're really going to be looking at your safety, because leaving can be the riskiest time for people. So it's really important that you understand your legal rights in terms of your housing, your children, your finances, your benefits, all of that kind of stuff. And you create this little support team of people around you. And that might include a lawyer. It might include somebody who's an expert in finances. It might include somebody like me who's a divorce coach. It will include, hopefully, some friends and family, maybe some voluntary organizations, specialist organizations that can help you, debt organizations, perhaps. So it's about creating that support team of people around you to help you so that you don't feel like you're doing it on your own, and you can tap into all of these different people as and when you need them. So we look at safety, we look at whether it's better for you to remain in the home with some extra legal measures in place, or whether it's safer for you to go to a refuge, or whether you go and stay with friends and family, or whether you plan your exit and go and rent somewhere else, or something like that. So there will be short-term things that we look at as well as long-term options. And it really is taking things one step at a time. So thinking about what you can cope with, what you can afford, what is best for you and your family. So just going back to that planning, sometimes we have to adjust that planning also as things happen. You know, sometimes a lot of how things go does depend on your ex and their behavior, and whether they're willing to negotiate, whether they're willing to be reasonable or not. So we have to adjust, and we have to look at the strategy as we go. And sometimes those plans change, but that's okay. You know, whatever they do, we can deal with. And I think it can make people doubt about their future. They can think, oh, am I going to be single forever if I leave this relationship? Am I going to be a single parent? Perhaps that's not something I ever envisaged or wanted. Maybe I don't actually ever feel like I want another relationship in future. What I would say is things change. I've had lots of clients who've said, no, never want another relationship again, ever. And they are now happily married with children, and yeah, very, very happy. You are perfectly capable of having a healthy relationship if you want one after an abusive relationship, because you aren't the problem. Your ex, or soon to be ex, is the problem. So you are more than capable of having a healthy relationship. You've just got to be good at boundaries. Generally, people that end up in abusive relationships aren't great at boundaries because they like to please other people, they don't like to hurt other people, and they like to fix things. But you absolutely have to have boundaries if you're that type of person. And what I always say is, please, please, please do not jump into another relationship thinking that that is going to heal you or, you know, make you feel better. Because if you are still vulnerable, if you haven't done the work on yourself, if you haven't really figured out what you want in a relationship, you will be an easy target, quite frankly, for an abuser, because they have a sixth sense, and they will be able to tell that you are vulnerable, and they will use it against you. So if you're going to start dating and you're looking for a healthy relationship, definitely take it slow. And another important thing to remember is you should never, ever put all your eggs in one basket. You should never rely on somebody totally for your happiness. If you have a partner and a healthy relationship, that's great. But you should also be happy on your own, in your own skin, being the person that you are. So there are lots of charities, lots of support organisations out there that can help you. There is so much free support and specialist support out there. Really understanding your rights and your options is really, really key to feeling empowered, to pushing through that fear of what if, and being able to take control back over your life and being able to move forward. The worst thing about being in an abusive relationship is feeling trapped, feeling stuck, like it's Groundhog Day and this is just your life and everything that you're experiencing day to day is inevitable. It's absolutely not inevitable. You can change it, you can stop it, and you can move on. So if you need support, definitely reach out to these organisations or speak to us and ask for that specialist support, and we'll point you in the right direction.
Wow, great. Thanks for that. Karen, if you don't mind me jumping in before everybody else with questions, I've got one. I'd like you to just explain something. I know what it is, but I'd like you, can you just cover off what Clare's Law is?
Yeah. Funnily enough, you mentioned that. I made a little note earlier about Clare's Law. So Clare's Law is a process where if you are in a relationship and you are concerned, maybe you're still quite early on in the relationship and you're starting to get that gut instinct. And I always say, trust that gut instinct more than anything else. If you're starting to get that gut instinct that is giving you a sense of, this doesn't feel right, I feel a bit scared of this, of my partner, I'm a bit worried that maybe they've done this before. Maybe I'm hearing some things on the grapevine. Maybe they're saying some things about their ex-partner before and it doesn't sound right. Maybe they talk really negatively about their ex. You can go to the police and you can ask them to do a Clare's Law application on your behalf. You can say, I'm worried that my partner may have a history of domestic abuse. And they will go away and they will search all of their databases and they will come back to you and they will divulge any convictions for domestic abuse offences that have happened in the past with their previous partners. Now, you're not allowed to share that information with your partner or anybody else for that matter. It is confidential information, but they share that with you to help you then make an informed decision. Do I still feel safe enough? Do I still want to be with my partner? Or actually, has that confirmed everything that my gut instinct was telling me? And actually, no, I don't feel safe and I need to get myself out of this relationship. So it was brought in to safeguard people that were concerned that there was a history of domestic abuse, but just didn't really have any tangible evidence of it. Now, what I would say about Clare's Law is they will only share convictions. Now, if it comes back and the police say, oh no, it's clear there's no domestic abuse convictions, it still doesn't guarantee that your partner is safe. That's why I would say you should trust that gut instinct. It just means that they perhaps haven't been caught, or maybe, you know, their previous victims weren't strong enough, didn't want to report to the police, maybe were too scared to report to the police. But it can be a really useful tool to help you have the confidence in your decisions if you're not sure whether to stay in the relationship or not.
I think it's a really helpful thing to remember that it exists. It's not a fail-safe, like you say. And unfortunately, these things are born out of tragedy. I think it was the victim's father who petitioned for Clare's Law to become, something that we could use.
Yeah.
But yes, it's really trust your gut. I love that. Yeah.
Yeah. You have to trust that gut instinct. They've actually done research on that gut instinct. You know, that feeling that you get where you just think something's off, something is not right. I don't feel comfortable. And it's an actual thing, you know, it's an actual physical response to danger. It's your body telling you to flee, to get out of there. But so often what happens is we dismiss that gut instinct and we go, oh no, they didn't really mean it. Oh, I'm just making too much of it. It will be okay. And you carry on and carry on. And so many times I hear, oh yeah, I had that gut instinct in the beginning and I should have trusted it.
Yeah. Your gut's been with you for life. It's the first person, the first aspect you should check in with, I suppose.
Yeah.
We've had obviously, just to continue the Clare's Law discussion here. Just to clarify, Clare's Law won't show arrests if there are no charges. It will literally just be convictions, won't it?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And actually, close family members and professionals can apply for Clare's Law as well on your behalf. So say your parent was really concerned about you and you didn't feel able to make that Clare's Law application, they could do it on your behalf, or a social worker could do it, or a police officer could do it, or your domestic abuse IDVA could do it for you. And also important to note that the person that you are asking them to research will not find out that you've made that Clare's Law application. It's completely confidential from them.
Yeah, that's really important. Great. Okay. All right, let's have a look at some other questions and things that we've got here. Bear with me a moment. Interesting. We've got something slightly different here, just a helpful comment in the chat. And this does make me kind of worry about regional differences and things. We've had someone who did actually make a Clare's Law application, and they received more information than just convictions.
Oh.
Oh dear.
I'm not sure that's supposed to happen, but
I'm not sure it is, but brilliant that it did, because clearly you had more of an informed position than you would have done if it had just been convictions. I hope whoever you are managed to get yourself out of that situation safely. Okay, so where are we? Let me just look at these in order. I feel like we're warming up. We've got so much to cover. Right.
There has been a bit of discussion recently, actually, about Clare's Law, because in some geographical areas, they will share information only if you are still in the relationship, and some forces will share it even after you've separated. So it is a bit of a postcode lottery, I'm afraid. And it does take time to get that information from the police. So it's not, you can't just kind of report it and ask for that information, then expect to get it the next day. Sometimes it takes, weeks, sometimes, unfortunately, to get that information.
Yes. Unfortunately, nothing does seem to move as quick as we want it to move at all. I can say that as obviously a professional working in this area. One of the questions that we do have is, how long does it take to get protective orders in place? I can tell you, never as quickly as we need them sometimes. There's also another question asking about, how can I prove abuse if there isn't any physical evidence? Do I need to start making notes of examples and evidence? I would always say yes. When you're in it, it's quite hard sometimes to have the privacy in order to keep a record. Any top tips there, Karen?
Yeah, absolutely. Evidence is key. So never delete anything, any text messages, emails, anything like that, voice notes, recordings. Definitely keeping a log of things can not only count as evidence, but it can help you make sense of it as well. And sometimes once you've left the relationship, it can be quite easy to minimize it, particularly if it's not physical. So having those notes will give you that chance to go back and reflect and go, oh yeah, that is how they made me feel. And yeah, that was a really awful incident. And for coercive control, there are lots of different ways that you can try to evidence that abusive behaviour. Obviously, photographs and things like that, and GP reports, hospital appointments, etc., are really, really useful for physical abuse. They can also be used if you've approached the GP, for example, and made disclosures of domestic abuse at home. Maybe you've gone for medication for depression, for example, and you've mentioned that you're scared of your partner. So that kind of stuff can be used as part of the coercive control evidence. You can also use things like bank statements to show money being moved from one account to another, or your wages perhaps being put into your partner's account rather than your account to show that financial abuse. You can use things like witness statements from friends and family who have perhaps seen the bigger picture. They've seen that deterioration in you, the way that you've become isolated from everybody since you've been in the relationship. So it gives that context about the power and control and how it's affected you. If you want a list of evidence that you can gather in terms of coercive control, there is one on the CPS website. It shows you everything that they look at when they are trying to look at that criminal threshold to charge somebody with coercive control. I quite often send that list out to clients to help them make sense of what information they can gather to prove their case. But of course, also it's your witness statement. It's you explaining how that person has made you feel, how you've had to adjust your behavior because of the way that they're threatening you or manipulating you or punishing you.
Yes, frequently I've met victims of abuse for the first time, and it is such a big deal crossing the threshold of a lawyer's office, meeting a stranger for the first time to talk about something that's quite often deeply personal and traumatic to talk about, and frequently people's minds go blank. There's no doubt in my mind that they're genuine victims, but faced with having to talk through to somebody what has happened, it's very daunting. Find the right legal representative if you're in a position where you can secure a solicitor. Anybody worth their salt should be have experience, obviously, of working in this area, and be patient. You know, you can give that lawyer your story in whatever format you choose and whichever format you can give them. Frequently, people like to write things down. In the past, I've had voice notes of instances from clients, which is quite helpful. We've got quite a lot of comments on the chat about financial abuse here, and abuse that happens post-separation, which unfortunately is a topic we talk about quite a lot and we see a lot, just because someone gets what used to be a decree absolute and is now called a final order for a divorce, or you know, just because somebody has maintained a physical separation, you're not living with your abuser anymore, doesn't mean that the abuse automatically stops, especially not if you're co-parenting. It's very, very difficult to stop it and to live through it, despite the fact you've managed to secure the separation. One comment that I can see here is regarding an abuser who makes references via their bank statements when they're doing the child maintenance transfer. I think it's the child maintenance payment. It's not a criminal offence, I'm afraid. And yes, the banks aren't very helpful in this regard, but you might want to look up somebody called Rosie Lyon, Lyon. I'm not sure if Kate's there to be able to put the details of Rosie in our chat box, because she is someone who's petitioned and made great advances regarding financial institutions and domestic abuse. That might be one to help with there.
If just to chip in there, if your ex is making a comment in the reference for the payment, so maybe using an abusive word or something, you know, that feels intimidating or threatening, you can ask the bank to take off those notifications now and block it, because again, it's just finding a way into abuse. You know, this is emotional abuse via that little notification, and on its own that can seem like a small thing, and you can, you know, other people might say, well, just ignore it, but actually that small thing coupled with everything else that they're doing can feel really difficult to cope with. So like you were saying, Sarah, the post-separation abuse again can be that drip effect, and if you don't try to put some boundaries in place for some of these things that can very, very quickly become overwhelming.
Yes. If you get a moment to have a flick through the chat, Karen, there's quite a few people in rubbish situations out there. Absolutely.
Yeah.
At the moment, it's lovely that people are sharing and being so supportive to each other. Actually, I love that on this webinar. It's great. My God, there are so many instances though of people being failed. Which is so awful to read.
And child maintenance is one of those things that, again, they use as a way of control. We could do a whole webinar just on child maintenance, to be honest, and financial.
Oh God, yeah, especially if the person paying child maintenance is self-employed. My God.
Oh yeah, minefield.
A huge amount of sympathy for people in that situation.
Yeah, it's a minefield.
Yeah.
But
reform is, I don't think, going to happen there for a long period of time, I'm afraid.
And unfortunately, with tech abuse and stuff, it's so difficult to keep on top of because things change all the time. They use devices and they use the tech devices as ways of infiltrating your life, infiltrating your headspace, getting all your attention, exhausting you. And so we have to just keep on top of things and on top of every new thing that they try and try to shut them down one by one. But yeah, they're trying to make great strides in terms of financial abuse and criminalizing it now because it's just so wrong, really. And the child maintenance service are again trying to do more to make sure that people get the maintenance payments that they are legally entitled to.
Crikey, it's a frustrating situation, isn't it? Okay, so if we circle back round to a situation where you are potentially supporting somebody or somebody close to you, maybe in an abusive relationship, and you're helping them. We've got a good question here, Karen. Someone's asked, what is the best way to keep a conversation open with someone you think is in an abusive relationship? If they deny or they won't talk about it, what's the best approach? Is it just to monitor and to stay available?
Yeah, definitely monitor, definitely stay available. It can feel kind of frustrating if you can see it and they can't, and you may think, oh, do you know what? I keep inviting them to things and they keep making excuses as to why they can't come. They keep protecting their partner and actually I don't like them. And you can want to not be around them, but actually it's really, really vital that you do stay around them because they may well need you at some point when they get that light bulb moment and they decide enough is enough. What I would say is keep inviting them to things, even if you think that they're going to make excuses and not come. Keep encouraging them, keep boosting their confidence because they will be getting a lot of negativity from their partner. So you need to counteract that with lots of positivity. Remind them of the person that they were, remind them of what they're capable of, remind them of how brilliant they are, what a good job that they're doing. Really try to open up their eyes to a future that could be happier, and you can drip feed that kind of stuff into conversations quite subtly without making it clear that you're talking about them. So for example, there was a program on television last night, everybody is talking about it, My Wife the Abuser, quite a graphic program, I have to say, but very impactful. And lots of people are talking about it on social media. So that could be a good conversation starter. You could say, I saw that program last night. Gosh, it was awful. This woman did this, this, and this to her husband. And, that was really not okay. What do you think about that? And just have that conversation and see if it does open anything up. And you could, again, point out things that you're concerned about. You could say, oh, I've noticed that you're, you look a bit low. I've noticed that you don't seem that happy. Is everything okay? And they might not talk about it. They might not be ready to do it, but just say, if that's the case, if anything like that is happening, I'm always here, you can always call me, I'll always be there for you, just to give them that reassurance that you do get it, even though they're not able to articulate it at that point. So it is about keeping those connections. It is about keeping those connections open, and also encouraging them to speak to professionals if they do get to the point of disclosing, because you're not the expert. And so just encouraging them to maybe ring an organisation like Women's Aid. They have confidential helplines. It doesn't cost them anything. They can have a confidential free call with somebody like myself or a solicitor. Most solicitors give a free half an hour. You can have that initial conversation, and sometimes that is enough to just give you the confidence to say, actually, this is not okay and I need to do something about it.
Yes, whoever it is who's raised that question, I think you're a lovely friend. I think that's wonderful. Hang in there, because things will change.
Yeah.
And what you were saying earlier, Karen, about planning, I know I'm plugging your book again, but there is a really good section on taking action. And it's great about the planning section because it even gives you a list of what to remember to take with you. If you're helping somebody plan an escape, then having that kind of an approach in this book with that list would really help, because everybody's mind goes blank sometimes. Absolutely. In a crisis, sometimes you don't always get the opportunity to plan things very well, do you?
No.
Right. Crikey, I wish we did these things in person sometimes. It'd be lovely to meet everybody. We talked a little bit at the beginning about the lack of statistics to give us a true picture regarding the extent of male victims of abuse. We also, I think, have a lack of up-to-date statistics regarding abuse in gay relationships. I'm mentioning that because one of our questions is it whether or not we have much information about female abusers of women. And I don't think we do, Karen. I don't think we have any up-to-date statistics anyway.
It's really difficult to get statistics on different types of relationships because it all comes down to how things are evidenced. We already know that only about 30% of people report anything domestic abuse related to police. So we are missing huge amounts of data. When it comes to the statistics that we know about, we always quote 1 in 4 women, 1 in 6 men. It happens to 1 in every 2 gay relationships. You are twice as likely to experience domestic abuse if you're in a same-sex relationship. You are twice as likely to experience domestic abuse if you have an addiction, if you are alcohol dependent, or you have mental health issues, etc. So there are certain demographics where you are at increased risk. We are very dependent on people coming forward and sharing that information with us. So yeah, we are missing huge amounts of data, but the reality is we all know somebody who has been in an abusive relationship, whether that's male to female, female to male, whatever, same sex, elderly people. Child to parent abuse is another different dynamic altogether. But we all know somebody that has been in an abusive relationship. That's the reality. It is like a pandemic in itself. And it infiltrates so many other areas of our lives and actually costs the government so much money, like billions and billions of pounds every year.
Yes. There's a question here, Karen, that I'm slightly reluctant to kind of raise, simply because we could do a whole session. In fact, we could do 6 months worth of sessions on this.
Oh, gosh.
which is, let me just find it. What does the law, the CPS, and the family courts do about domestic and financial abuse? So we could be here till the cows come home, couldn't we?
Well, right, yeah.
And interesting, because you were in court this morning, weren't you?
Yeah, I was. And I, when it comes to financial abuse, it is one of those hard things, the things that is hard to evidence. And they are taking steps within the Domestic Abuse Act now. They've specified financial abuse as part of that wider context of post-separation abuse. However, there's no real clarity at the moment as to what consequences there are if you are being financially abusive to somebody else. So it's very much a grey area still at the moment. Again, in terms of support for financial abuse, there's an amazing organisation called Surviving Economic Abuse. They have lots of information on their website, and they have a support forum for people that are being financially abused. Again, we find that where there is domestic abuse, where there is coercive control, there generally is always financial abuse, because the two ways that abusers can get to you even after separation are through the children and through the finances, essentially.
It's a case-by-case basis. It depends on your situation, as to how the family courts in particular can remedy things. Are you married? Are you not married? We treat, obviously, people differently if they're not married, because the law, we don't have the same provisions. It comes frequently down to evidence. What is the situation? Is it a case that there's a recent separation in a marriage, and the person there's a financially weaker party who's not getting the right financial support from the provider? How do we get things like interim maintenance and maintenance pending suit dealt with? For example, there are remedies there. Go and see a lawyer. Everybody does free appointments now. You can go around everybody, do a beauty parade, go and see somebody you're happy with. If there's a sneaking suspicion you might be eligible for legal aid, go and get that checked out, first of all, with a legal aid practice. There are some very good legal aid lawyers out there. I know they get a bit of a bad press because they are busy lawyers, I'm afraid, but there are some absolutely cracking ones out there. Domestic abuse, what can the family courts do? Again, it's going to depend on what you need, and what level of evidence you have. I can't tell you that it's necessarily a walk in the park trying to get an injunction. An injunction is a draconian measure, so the courts need to make sure that if they're preventing somebody from returning to their home, that it's done, that it's appropriate, that it's fair, that it's right, and that is the right outcome. But go and see a lawyer. As I say, we can do multiple sessions on this going forward, I think, Karen, can't we?
Yeah, and I think if you've got issues like you need to financially separate from your partner and you've got children together, you absolutely have to get advice from different people, because professionals will all have their own idea about strategy. You will know what you can cope with, what you can afford. You will know your ex or soon to be ex better than anybody else. So you will know what their motivation is. Is their motivation financial because they want to hold on to their money? Is their motivation that they want more time with the children and they don't want you to have as much time with the children? So you have to take all these things into consideration and then look at the options that you've got. And unfortunately, we are in a state with family court and legal financial proceedings and mediation and arbitration. It can be very, very confusing because there are so many different paths that you can go down. So really, try to get clarity and guidance about each of those options, and then you can narrow it down and you can start to think to yourself, well, I can't afford that, I can cope with this. Maybe if I get a bit of support, I can go down this route. And then you can start to see a way forward, have a bit of a strategy. You may need to adjust that strategy again, depending on how your ex responds to it as you go. But you can keep moving forward. And actually, if you can see that light at the end of the tunnel, that can be really empowering and really freeing, because you have to brace yourself. Like Sarah says, it's not easy. There will be bumps in the road. There will be times when you feel like, oh gosh, maybe it would have been easier to stay than it would be to leave. But you've just got to keep pushing forwards and know that you're doing it for the right reasons. Trust your judgment and be confident in what you're doing.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think that's probably a good note to end on. Crikey, you've been a brilliant crowd tonight. Thank you very much. And actually, we're going to be talking about this quite a bit more next month. I did say earlier that I'd like to spend more time with Karen, and I get to next month. I've been emailed and reminded that on Wednesday, the 24th of April, I'll be seeing Karen again, because we're going to do another session this time on recognizing abuse in a long-term relationship. So anybody who may feel that we haven't covered something today, feel free to come along next month. And we'll try and get everything covered. I know there's a couple of things that we haven't quite managed to do a deep dive into tonight, but give us some feedback, let us know. Let's try and see if we can get these sessions tailored to help everybody. It's been a joy to have you all tonight. I'm sorry it's a tough subject, and I'm sorry, there's a reason you're here, which is sad. And as I said before, we're probably going to be carrying on doing these types of sessions for a long time to come. But if we can help each other and also spread the word and get people updated, informed, perhaps is better. I'm not sure. But there is support out there. Absolutely. For you. Anyway. Right. Well, Karen, I'm going to see you next month then.
Yeah. We'll have another interesting conversation, I'm sure. I was just going to say, for anybody that has got some burning questions following on from this webinar, if you want to get in touch with me, everybody gets a complimentary call anyway. If you want to go onto my website, there's information there that might help you. You've got the helpline numbers here on the webinar, and obviously, like Sarah said, Stowe Law are more than happy to give you that initial advice. It really is about getting that information, that guidance, and that clarity on what options you've got. You don't have to put up with it, is what I would say to end on.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Life's too short.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Well, good night, everybody. And we may well see you next month, as I say, Wednesday, 24th of April. Okay. All right. Good night. Thank you very much. Thanks, Karen. Big thanks. Take care. Have a lovely evening, everyone.